can check if the sound works.
Test, test, test.
Yes, we can hear you well. Can you hear
No,
us?
no, no, test on the stream, Alex.
Oh, yeah, right. Sorry. Is the fifth talk today? So how do you check it? Is it
You
this
just
one?
play it the live. Joshua, can you check it? Is it? I have it
Oh,
here.
yes. Okay.
But let me hear some.
Hello, hello.
Hello, hello.
Yes,
Okay.
it works. Perfect.
Perfect.
So we will have to mute while you talk because otherwise it will be just a
Mm.
double echo.
Yeah, sure.
So
Okay, so are we ready to go?
I think so.
Wait, yes. No, I muted already. Okay. So now I muted.
Okay. Well, I will start. I'll just periodically check this chat over here. Kia ora, my name is Mix. I'm from New Zealand. I'm going to be talking to you about a project I've been working on called Ahau, and it is it's a indigenous piece of software and designed for recording identities and sort of lineages. So this is just some slides that I've stolen from a talk I did at FOSDEM, so forgive me. So this is where I'm from. I grew up in Hawke's Bay. I now live in Wellington. It's important to introduce yourself, like kind of where you're from. It gives a context, and this is really important as part of like New Zealand culture. So another important part of New Zealand culture is that we've got a bicultural nation that's founded on a treaty that was between the Crown and the Indigenous people of New Zealand. So this sets us up for some like quite interesting requirements for New Zealand. So one of them, here's a slice of my history. This is my family tree. So what is Ahau and why are we working on family trees and archiving histories? So Ahau started out as an exploration, like many things, of like, what would it be like if we used blockchain for indigenous communities? We still good? Cool. It seems like there's an emerging economy, alternative economies possible, different ways of organizing using sort of blockchain or Web3 tools. Early prototypes and sort of experiments in the space discovered that the Ahau team discovered that to do that sort of organizing, you need to be very clear who your family is, like who are the people that we would be collaborating with if we were a family that was to coordinate what to do with our tribal lands, for example. So coming back to whakapapa, which is the understanding your history as a collective and understanding who you are, is really the foundation on which we're planning to build future things. So whakapapa is about history, but also includes things like stories about the people. So this here is my mother. And so the long goal is to build community organizing tools on top of this foundation. So what that's going to look like is we've just got a grant actually to work with verifiable credentials. So this is part of the sort of digital identity sort of space. So we're gonna the move that we're trying to perform now is to set up tribes and iwi in New Zealand as identity issuers, basically, that should be equally recognised. So the Crown issues identities in the form of, or like verifiable sort of credentials in the form of passports and driver's licenses. But the treaty in New Zealand sets us up, I think, to require that iwi, Indigenous people, should have sovereignty over how identity is presented. Yeah. So what is Ahau, and like how is it interesting in a sort of peer-to-peer context? So data sovereignty is really important in a Māori context, because some interpretations of recorded information, especially about your history, like that history is you. And there's this concept of, I won't read this quote right now, but the concept that you've got like a modi, which is your sort of like, an essence, which it's not really appropriate for other organizations, you know, based in San Francisco or Singapore or whatever, to be holding your data. It's especially when it's some of this information might include like where some of your relatives were buried, important historical sites, and that's not necessarily public. So we've taken an educated sort of gamble with Ahau and are building it peer-to-peer, such that the data is held by the people using it. So we're using Scuttlebutt so that people can store data on their phones, and that replication can happen between phones or between laptops. So here's a person introducing an ancestor, recording it. There's an encrypted backup made. This is just a relay which is kept online at all times, which facilitates some of the transfer of data across, like NAT traversal is a challenge. There's nothing particularly special about this node. This node can go offline and we can replace it with another one, or if these people are in the same physical space, then replication can happen as well. So here's an example of upgrading to a much bigger data store. We link it with the old one. Data is replicated across from there. This becomes like another one. This one can now go offline, and yeah. So part of that research we did was looking at existing whakapapa tools. We saw that, you know, people were running their own servers, but one of the problem is maintenance of these. So building things peer-to-peer means that hopefully it introduces a lot of challenges, technical challenges, but the hope is that it makes that this infrastructure could essentially just be a laptop running in someone's living room. And we've made installers where, you know, anyone can install one of those nodes with a little bit of help. There's still some like router setup. So I don't know how much I want to talk about Scuttlebutt. Maybe I'll see what the interest is, but Scuttlebutt is the distributed database that we're building on. A similar thing probably could have been built with DAT, but this was a technology that I'm familiar with. Very briefly, Scuttlebutt is an append-only cryptographically signed log. What that means is if Alice is publishing messages, her second message references the first one, and it references it by its hash, and then she signs this. So this has nice replication properties, because if Alice is getting updates from me, all she has to do is she can ask any peer, it could be me or it could be someone else like my dad, do you have any updates from Mix? And this is her discovering that there's a new update, message 3, and she can see that it points to the correct previous message and it's been signed by a public key. So in Scuttlebutt, identities are public-private key pairs. There's other things we could touch on in terms of, so when you're in a peer-to-peer context, one of the challenges is that when you're editing a profile, we can now store data in these updates where you might update the date of birth of a particular ancestor, and this would be this update, and this would be updating their middle name because it might have been missing or something like that. So this is the happy case. The tricky case is when there's what we call concurrent edits, and this could be my sister published an edit or I published an edit, and we executed the change at the same time, and because it didn't go through a centralized server, there wasn't knowledge of this until we replicate later. And similar to sort of Git, we can introduce another node which brings that divergence back together. So this is something we call tangles in Scuttlebutt. It's just a directed acyclic graph, and we combine this with sort of storing mutations in here to build something that's like a CRDT. CRDT stands for conflict resistant data type, I think. So yeah, we are doing some CRDT-like stuff. Don't want to talk about authorship right now. Another requirement in the context of Ahau is everything needs to be encrypted. So yes, can talk about this more as well. Yeah. So how is this? How, like, other than the digital identity thing that I talked about, one of the use cases that we're seeing Ahau being used for is the concept of a treaty settlement. So there was a treaty signed in about 1840, and then the British proceeded to not honour that treaty for about 100 years, and then more recently there's been a tribunal set up to amend or make reparations for some of the transgressions against that treaty. So the Crown, which is sort of the state in New Zealand, negotiates with tribes to either return Indigenous lands or agree on an amount of money that would go some way to recognising some of the damage done. So, but some of the negotiation is hard because you've got this iwi, which is the highest level of organisation in the Māori world. And iwi is like a tribe, and it is made up of these sub-tribes, and each of these is like a family or an extended family. The Crown would like to negotiate with sort of one entity, and so people are using Ahau to build up this lineage, establish who is part of their tribe, and this is going to be used as a register which is exported and shared with the Crown, like these are the people who you're dealing with. So very briefly, I can show you what Ahau currently looks like. It's I'll make it bigger. Can I make this font bigger? Maybe not. Here we go. So I'll just show you an example, whakapapa. This is, we're just using it to show our team organisation. You can see where I am here somewhere. Yeah, I'm one of the developers. We've got other developers who've contributed in the past as well. So I guess what's interesting or useful, we can go and see like stories that are associated with Mix. This archive doesn't have a lot installed in it right now. So at the moment we've got stories about, these are sort of like origin stories, mythologies, and where people came from. So Tane is the god of the forest. So you can store videos, so we use DAT to store encrypted videos that are streamed between peers. Hyperdrive, whatever. Wondering if there's anything else that I'd want to show you. Yeah, I think I'll pause there and I'll come back to the chat and see if anyone has any questions they'd like to ask. I wonder what happens if I push that. Can hear you, yes.
Some people in the audience.
Yeah, I can see you, yeah.
This sounds really interesting. You also mentioned that the indigenous issue their own passports. Do they use the software? Did I understand correctly?
This is the long game. So no, we don't currently issue passports. So the first use case that I'm really excited about is getting to the point where someone could open a bank account and they wouldn't have to have like a New Zealand driver's license, because there are quite a few like unbanked people, and part of opening a bank account is usually there's like a KYC or AML, like know your customer sort of process, so defending against fraud. And all the bank really wants is to tick the box like, is this a trustworthy person? And they use New Zealand driver's licenses or passports as a proxy to answer that question, right? Like, oh, the New Zealand government trusts this person, but there's no particular reason that you shouldn't be able to say, oh, Ngā Manawa, the iwi, they trust this person, therefore we trust them. There is no, nobody has like an objective claim on identity. It's just who you want to trust is the, yeah.
So it sounds like there's a monetary incentive behind this with the relationship with the treaty and the crown. Are there any protections for people putting false information or even group collusion?
Yeah, good question. So the treaty, some iwi have already settled. So yes, there can be there's definitely like money and power can be involved in history, because if you can claim that you're part of an iwi, then you might be, that might give you voting rights over some land, or it might give you some settlement rights over some money, or things like this. So this is a really interesting area where so there are we use private groups and a registration process, so people apply to join a private group and have access, and so we've made it possible so that each tribe can ask people to fill in a form which has custom questions about, like, who are you? Who are your grandparents? Like, where's the land that you come from? Do you have like if they already have an ID system for the tribe, like what's your current tribal identity? So these are some of the tools that exist for checking someone's the right person coming into a group. Another thing that's on our roadmap that we need to build is that currently anyone can add to a whakapapa graph. I can say, oh, this person is this person's child over here. We still good, Seropath? Oh. Yeah. Okay, I'll keep talking. So where was I? I was talking about how, and one of the interesting things about a peer-to-peer system is that anyone has the authority to write anything, because there's not a centralized server which says, this edit is allowed. So there's some interesting, this is like great in some ways, in that like anyone can contribute to the history and to the story, but it's not great in some other ways, because just because I contributed something doesn't mean it's true. So one of the things that we need to build still is a verification process. So, like, I might have a cousin who adds someone to the family tree, and that might be their truth, but it may not be recognized by my family's historian. So we have the concept of, within a tribe or an iwi, there are people who verify or sign their names to certain linkages and inclusions. Don't know if that's, yeah. So it's complicated is the answer.
Yeah, that sounds complicated. The other question I have is that, like, it's a little more complicated for me, but essentially I'm from Korea, and in Korea they have a very regulated and very long history of family registries. So you can look. They have registry books that you can look at, like, all the way back, like as far as you want to, basically, like hundreds of books.
Amazing.
And so, like, they use a centralized system, obviously, to make that work and to protect it and to maintain it. And so, what is the impetus for creating this system instead of doing just a centralized system?
Yeah. Well, I guess who becomes the authority and the gatekeeper and the moderator for that history? So there's a couple of considerations. One of them is, then you need to appoint like a king over your history. So that has pros and cons. It means that, if you trust that king, so-called king of that database, then you're going to get one uniform, consistent history, and maybe have good control over who has the appropriate access and can contribute and stuff. It has disadvantages, like who gets to read that information, like what information goes in there. Does that registry include people's current phone numbers? Does it include information about adoptions that have happened within the family? So in the Māori world, it's not uncommon for a child to be given to a sibling if they didn't have any children, or if they couldn't have children. Is that something that's recorded? Sometimes that's like a private thing that you might not want everyone to know. There's also like resilience and connectivity issues. So resilience as in like, okay, you've got one database. What happens if something goes wrong with it? You've got a single point of failure maybe. Or if an attacker gets in there, what happens then? And there's also connectivity. So one of the perks of Scuttlebutt at least, is that it works offline, as in you have a copy of the data, your local data, and your family's data, and it doesn't matter if there's an earthquake in Auckland which takes out a data center. I have the data. So there's resilience to that, and there's also this also works on an island in the Pacific when there's actually no connection to the internet.
Yeah, I was just wondering. So the one thing about the Korean system is obviously presumably the Korean government, which is like a long-lasting thing, has got an interest in keeping those records. So they may have once been kept in ledgers, and now they're online or in a database or something. So the thing about what I wonder about the technology is, like, this may be the latest thing today, but in 20 years' time, does it keep going? Who maintains it? Like, what's the future sustainability of a project like this, for example?
Yes, hard question. I don't have an answer for that. There's like a good chance that digital technology fails or becomes outmoded, or the encryption gets broken, and then that's like a very hard thing to deal with. the best we can do is like like building tools which allow you to export the data as well, so that it's not locked in here. So we've currently got like a CSV export, so you can take a data dump of this, so it's never locked in the system forever.
Gotta take a snapshot and fork it.
I've got a real quick point on the like who's gathering the data and why. Like, really interesting looking at the history of things like a census where you go around and gather information about who's in the country, what are their names, how old are they. I'd be really interested in knowing like what the history of Korea's ledger is. There's like, one of the reasons for gathering people's names is taxation, right? So who is this data serving and what is it being gathered for? I think like what you measure and how you record it shapes a lot of, like, is a reflection of your values. So the system that we're building is designed to be aligned with Māori values, and it's designed to serve sense of individual and collective identity, whereas a census is not designed for that. Can't hear you right now. I can only see Nina's microphone is unmuted.
Is this one working?
Is it working now?
Correct.
All right. Yeah, that's a pretty interesting project. I personally definitely am interested to follow along and see how it progresses. I find the idea that the indigenous people could maybe issue their own passports quite interesting. Maybe one day. How realistic do you think that would? Is there like a good chance that this can actually happen?
I think the passport one is really hard. Where we're starting is in this coming year is working with distributed digital identities. So there's the Department of Internal Affairs in New Zealand is starting to work with digital identities. So we're going to be working towards building some interoperation there. So I think the passport thing is like a hard problem because it involves a lot more moving systems, but getting to the point where you can get a bank to accept something or a university to accept your application and say my ID is attested by this tribe, I think those are like doable, but still like, it's going to be years of work, but important work. What I'm really excited about is I think New Zealand has a responsibility around this treaty, and there's like a strong grounding that we can and should be allowed to do this. And what I'm excited about is proving this as a model in New Zealand and then copying it around the world, because there's no reason that other people couldn't copy it. I guess it's different. The New Zealand context is like we've got like a tribal context which isn't the same as other places, but yeah.
I have a question. Yeah, I could have missed a bit, so sorry if it's a dumb, naive question. And thanks also for everything so far. And it was around the relationship between the indigenous population and the state. So the crown being a sort of colonial power that nicked a load of land. And in that model, it's very connected, and you're somewhere in that picture. I was going to say mix, but yeah, somewhere in the mix. And the treaty is the important bit, I guess, which I didn't grasp the whole thing. And in what sense does the indigenous thing really want to relate to this colonial power structure, and how does this technology sort of factor in that?
Yeah, gosh, I'm not a treaty expert. What could I say? I guess my like naive response would be it's complicated interacting with the crown and this treaty tribunal that's been set up. It's not perfect. Like typically Western colonial forces want to interact with like one entity. They're like and they want to do stuff like put a land title on one person's name, and that just doesn't make sense in Te Ao Māori. It's like, what do you mean? Like, a person doesn't own land. That's ridiculous. Like, this is a place that we look after and that looks after us. So there's all sorts of problems. But having said all of that, it is a clear pathway that does like work to an extent. So even though it's like messy and unpleasant interacting with the crown, probably it's also like a pathway to access some resources which could better the collective good of a tribe. So there are iwi who have made like settlements for many millions of dollars, and they now have they've built businesses using those resources and are like funding education within their communities. So yeah.
I also have one more question, but maybe a more technical one this time. I wonder, there are apps built on top of SSB, like Patchwork or maybe Manyverse. Is Ahau like interoperable with those, or are there like certain differences?
Yeah, so
maybe just to add one more thought, and maybe you can include it in the answer. Is this a tool that anyone can use? Like, is it open for? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, to speak to the code, Ahau is open source and free to use. It's being built by a company, but the company is resourced through grants and also like partnerships with different iwi, because they're interested in using the tool and are paying for customizations. It's kind of like a bit of a Red Hat model, consultancy model, I guess. So Ahau is free for anyone to use. In terms of the code base, uses the same stack basically as Manyverse and the other Scuttlebutt apps. So I don't know, I don't need to show you. There's like I can show you like real briefly. So I use an old one that I used to maintain called Patch Bay. Where are we? Here. So this is another face of Scuttlebutt. It's just a social media chat thing. People are sharing their like mushroom recipes and foraging adventures stuff, whatever. So one of the main difference between Ahau and the Scuttlebutt main, we call this, I guess, the main network, is that they use different network keys. So this means that the data can never cross from Ahau to Scuttlebutt. And we did this very deliberately because it's never the case that in Ahau we want people's family data to accidentally be replicated onto another person's computer who's not part of their family. You know, there could just be some hacker in Germany, and it's like, why would they have my family info? Even if it's encrypted, it's not right. Like, yeah.
All right, yeah, that makes sense.
Any more questions? Anyone?
Great.
I think, yeah.
It's not really a question, it's a thought from what you said, which is I think what you're implying in New Zealand, you've got a political and legal lever for this kind of thing that can get this in.
Yes.
Whereas, like in other countries and jurisdictions, it would be interesting. You won't have that.
Correct.
You haven't got that reason, so it'd be interesting to think if there are other jurisdictions around the world that could then follow on, and you could get it in. To have a similar kind of lever,
Yeah.
I suppose.
But I'm hoping we can be a case study. I think so. There's definitely interest. Like there are people in the crypto world who are very interested in this, like verifiable credential work, because, yeah, the ability to bank the unbanked is potentially really lucrative. So I think there's like interesting social and business use cases for this. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, thank you very much for the inspiring talk then. And I hope more jurisdictions will follow the example once it's working, and I think that would be pretty cool. And right, maybe we can even reach out to you next year, and we'll see what if there's an update. Hopefully by then they issue passports. But yeah,
Yeah,
even if it's just like a bank account, something that's progress.
All right. Hey, thank you very much for inviting me. And if you have any questions, please sing out. Yeah.
Thank you.
Ka kite. Bye.